Hey everybody, welcome to the Hiraeth and Other Words podcast. I am your host, Timothy Mangle, and I'm doing another solo episode. And the topic of this week, I've been looking forward to talking about this probably since I started the podcast, maybe halfway through or whatever. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about the simulation theory or the simulation hypothesis, time, and the purpose of reality, which seems like this is all way above my pay grade, but I'm going to try to dive into these things and kind of just help us find a relationship to them. But before I go into that, I just have a couple announcements up top that I wanted to share with you. This week that this is coming out, I am starting a bonus podcast for Patreon subscribers. Now, any tier that you sign up on will get this podcast, and it comes out bi-weekly. So I don't know if you've maybe caught on to how I've tried to structure the podcast, but it's mostly 1 week I'll do a solo episode, and then the next week we'll do a interview or a conversation with somebody. So my plan is on those off weeks of the solo episodes, meaning on the weeks that I have guests on, I'll be releasing a bonus podcast that week, and that'll just be a solo episode for the most part. I don't really plan on having people on the bonus podcast, but don't be surprised if they show up. But so what is the bonus podcast? I describe it to myself, or how I'm approaching it is really as like my spiritual diary. Because I think for me, I've spent most of I actually haven't kept a really good diary of my journey. And it's something I'm remorseful about, quite truthfully, because I've experienced a lot, and I've learned a lot and encountered a lot and all that stuff. And I wish I would have wrote more down, or just had it recorded. So, I want to start this podcast to really just kind of start talking about the books that I'm reading, or whatever I'm listening to, or concepts that I'm, working through, or whatever it is, or just even personal growth stuff that I feel comfortable sharing. But yeah, so that'll be over there. That's linked in the description if you want to check that out. Go ahead. Like I said, that'll be launching this week on Wednesday. And what also is happening on next Wednesday, I believe, on the first Wednesday of February, is my mom's and I, Margaret Kinsey and I have to remember that not everyone knows her as my mom, but Margaret Kinsey, who is my mother, we're going to be doing essentially what we're describing it as a spirituality 101. We're going to be doing a class on that and really diving into just practices and the philosophy of it all, and how do we apply these things. And so if you're a fan of my mom and I's conversations, I would totally check that out. I'm really hoping that it would be a time for her to shine through, because she just has so much wisdom and experience, and has such a great outlook on life in general, that I'm really hoping to be able to dive in and share as much as I can with everybody. So go ahead, check those out. No pressure. But yeah, there's a lot of stuff involved with the tiers and everything, from picking episode titles to picking episode topics, to suggesting topics, to getting percentages off merch and live shows and stuff that we have planned out in the future. But speaking of the future, let's talk about time and the simulation and not get too far ahead of ourselves, shall we? Now, where do we want to start here? Man. So last week with Jaron, we did talk a little bit about the simulation hypothesis, or the simulation theory. And so let me kind of just break that down for people who aren't really familiar with what that is necessarily. So I'd say over the past, 20 years, most of my life, I guess you can see this emerge of this belief that, and it really probably started with the movie The Matrix, right? Of this idea of that we're living in this reality that we can kind of, transcend and escape from. And the idea, it's kind of morphed into, is the idea that that reality itself exists within some kind of supercomputer that is essentially running this as a program, and allowing it to kind of play out as such. And the question I really just have to ask is, like, if we didn't have technology as such as a codependent thing over the past 30, 40 years, would we innately be having these same intuitive thoughts about the nature of reality? And my personal opinion is no, probably not. And the reason I say that is because one thing that I've really discovered is that people's worldviews and their philosophies and their religions really reflect the world around them. And, an example of that's pretty good is if you look in Eastern religions, there's a lot more emphasis on like monkeys and elephants. I mean, this is a tapestry, which is traditionally more Eastern things, and I'm pretty sure there's elephants. Yeah. So those things don't show up in Western mythology so much, obviously, because we don't have them, right? So there's something to be said about, philosophies and religions and traditions and all these things, that they're really not just as simple as, statements or whatever. It's a relationship, as all things are, between the collective people and the reality that they're experiencing together. And any good religion or philosophy, to some degree, it will help you be able to navigate your reality better than you were before you were introduced to it. And the reason that's true about religion, I don't know necessarily about philosophy, because philosophy is really just the study of the nature of life. So there's not really this burden on philosophy to answer the questions of, well, what do we do? How do we move forward? And it does to some degree, but it doesn't have the same focus on applying things and doing things for your betterment that religion does. So that's the difference there between religion and philosophy, is that philosophy is really just trying to answer questions, but whereas religion is really trying to satisfy and connect the deeper parts of the individual. Now, I say all that for the reason of asking the question of, does the simulation hypothesis do that for us? Does it help us migrate reality in a better and more cohesive way than if that narrative wasn't true? And I find myself thinking about, when we play The Sims, to some degree it's a simulation. That's probably where that word comes from. And this is probably just a lot of my personal opinions, but when I think about that reality, it seems very cold and calculating. And when I look out at the reality that I'm experiencing, separate from the technology that is it runs perpendicular with it, I notice that nature seems to be much more alive. It seems to be a lot more, interactive. It has so much more of a personality than a computer, from my perspective, could ever offer. And obviously, if it's a computer that's great enough to simulate reality, then it should be a computer that would be great enough to, encompass this thing feeling alive. But again, it's for me, I see this clear, and we talked about this last week on the episode, is there's this clear distinction between the decline of traditional God or traditional creation myth in the West, with a pretty rapid increase in the simulation theory hypothesis. Okay, so it's like as God decreases in popularity, technology increases, but as you know, and it's not just the idea of God, it's kind of what it represents as creator and the thing that has set everything into motion. It's the thing that dictates purpose to some degree, and all those things. So as that was kind of at a decline, we had this incline of a very interesting foreign entity that was entered into our society and rapidly changed everything. And it's technology, it's the internet, and it's of course, as all of this stuff began to consume our life and we were getting rid of old traditional understandings of the constructs and the nature of reality, we replaced it with something that was similar to what we were experiencing. Because again, as I said before, that's how these philosophies and religions and traditions and cultures and all these things are birthed, because there's a relationship of the individual with the reality around them that they're experiencing. So, and I think about, it's not just enough that in the Christian myth or whatever that God created reality. There's these all other stories and things around it that were built into the narrative to kind of give it structure and form and to kind of help it be cohesive and helpful to the individual, right? So it's not just God making reality for whatever reason, but there's things around that were placed into the Christian narrative and the Jewish narrative and all these other narratives that really help the individual wrap their heads around the circumstances that they find themselves in. So that's why I keep trying to hammer home this idea that a good religion or a good philosophy or a good worldview can really encompass reality as it fully is and be able to hold the weight of it all. And so when I think about something like the simulation theory, it's like, well, yeah, it's okay. So somehow a computer was constructed that was so grandiose that it was able to simulate a reality that seems indistinguishable from. Well, see, again, that's the problem, is because we're defining these terms from our perspective to the grandiose area, right? So it's like, well, what if it, because reality to us it's real, it's you don't have to ask anybody, is reality real or whatnot. It's so just obvious that it is. And this is why I wanted to throw time in with this topic, is because this is, and I'm sorry if I'm going to hurt anybody's feelings, but this is how you can tell that if someone just really has a low understanding of what philosophy is, or just the 101 level of appreciation for the art of philosophy, is when they say that time isn't real. And I'm sure if you were watching the video, you just saw my eyes roll back in my head when I said that statement, because I remember hearing that when I was younger, people just constantly saying, time isn't real, or time's an illusion, or time's a construct. And the third one of those things that I said is true. The first two were so laughably incorrect, because if you say the statement, time isn't real, the question then is asked, well, then what elapsed between the beginning of your sentence and the end of your sentence? I don't understand what you would call that as anything else than time. And, to be fair, Einstein said that time exists as part of as time-space, or space-time rather. So that space and time have to exist concurrently, because you can't have one without the other, right? Again, because going back to my idea of a sentence, is that a sentence has a begin point and an end point. And for that to unfold, there needs to be space. Space between the beginning of the sentence, space between the end of the sentence. And that's represented not just in time, but it's also represented physically, because there's an actual there's something being portrayed in the space perspective, which is, the reality that we can perceive and touch. And there's a lapsing of, again, time there. So to say that time isn't real, it's a ridiculous statement, because again, so I'll give credit to the idea of time being a construct, which again, it's true because sure, you can say that 2 o'clock doesn't exist outside of the construct that we all agree upon. But here's the thing, friends, when we all agree upon 2 o'clock, we make it real collectively. Again, so I've talked about this before about a stop sign. Is a stop sign doesn't just represent just, it's not just metal on metal with some red paint, but it means more than the sum of its parts. I'm getting very passionate. and because the reason I get so passionate when I talk about this, the simulation or time stuff, is because these aren't healthy worldviews to hand to people that help them navigate through reality. All it does is kind of send them into chaos. And again, this is my own personal bias as somebody who's much more in love or much more inclined to give myself to the more romantic interpretations of reality. And what I mean by that is the idea of a loving God who sets forth creation to interact with it and to love it solely and intentionally. And I think about the simulation theory, and again, it's not just because there's not to say that I haven't had times in my life where the code feels off, or it feels like everything in reality is just cold and calculating. But there's been times as well, like I said, that reality seems so personal and seems to have such a intention about our lives. And this, you can see it in our language when we talk about going through things, or I'm really being tested, or trials or seasons, or again, we have to look at our language and really notice that on a subconscious level we do describe reality as being alive and intimate with us. And again, it doesn't mean that a computer couldn't do that, but it seems to me that we're only saying computer because it's the things that surround us. It's not because reality itself gives this presentation of I am a computer. And that's a perfect segue into this Christian idea that that really helps us understand what, to some degree, the purpose of reality. It's a good jumping off point to where I want to go. So there's this verse in the book of Romans in the Bible that says something along the lines of everything that is to be known about God can be known about God through nature. So what is nature? Nature it's reality, right? There's a hard time to differentiate between those two things, so I'll probably just use those kind of concurrently going forth here. But nature then, in the context of this scripture, exists to teach us, right? So it's if there is a God, again, reading it within the context of the story, then this scripture is saying that nature is given to show you what God is like. And I think that is a brilliant statement. I think it's a correct statement, because here's the thing, is any sort of interpretation, any sort of understanding of reality only happens within reality. So we're forced then to use the tools that are present to us to try to describe the things that are larger than us and larger than what we can see. And again, so it's nature, and the Eastern Church has a better understanding of this idea than we do in the West. They have a philosophy or a worldview or whatever you would want to call it that says, creation itself is the first Bible and that the Bible is the second one. Meaning that if we give the traditional definition of the Bible as the thing by which we know and understand the ultimate, then it's nature first, even by the definition of the Bible itself. So it's reality. It exists, again, to be this thing that teaches us and to show us and to, to reveal something that seems important, that it's revealed and not just known, but that it's something that needs to be learned, and something that just isn't inherent, but something that needs to be found, and something that needs to be kind of struggled to, or even awoken to. And so this brings me on to another idea that is somewhat similar. I'm not going to sit here and claim that they're the same thing, because I don't necessarily believe that they are, but there's definitely some overlap. In the Hindu philosophy or religion, or whatever you'd want to call it, they have this concept of Maya. Now, Maya it's this same idea exists in Christianity, but I just don't feel like going down that path at the moment. But in Hinduism, Maya is an extension of Krishna, or Ram, or the ultimate God figure. So creation exists as this thing that is kind of extended out of the ultimate, and it exists as this place where the ultimate is fragmented into individuals such as us to, can you guess what we're here to do? To learn and to kind of forget and to remember and to wrestle with these things. And Maya exists as this aspect of God or Ram or Krishna in this religion or philosophy, as the thing, again, it teaches you. So you're going along doing your thing. And I genuinely believe this happens to everyone, regardless of what your creed or your interpretation of reality is that you're kind of just going along, minding your own business, and then nature teaches you a lesson. Whatever it is, maybe it needs to be that you need to trust more, or that you need to be more forgiving, or whatever it is. And again, going back to our language, is we do say this as, this idea of the universe is teaching me a lesson, or it's true that whatever you're here to do, whatever your purpose is here, it seems to be, at least from these, we have Christianity and we have Hinduism, that they're trying to say that part of the purpose of the incarnation of the individual is to learn, and to not just learn, but to apply it, right? So it's not just about knowledge, or like sounds that happen in your head that, that's knowledge, or words or thoughts or whatever, but it's about embodied wisdom. So it's not just about learning that it's good to love, it's going and loving, right? That's clearly so much better than just understanding that it's the right thing to do. Because true understanding of loving people looks like you loving people, right? And this is something that I hammer on so much to myself, because I'm so much a person that gets caught up in, I've just sat here and talked about I deconstructed and this whole idea of the simulation, all this stuff, but really what it comes down to is, am I loving people well? Am I loving the reality that I'm in well? So I don't need to get bogged down in these things as much. But it's important to take the messages that these larger philosophies and these religions hand to you and try to implement them into your life, because for thousands of years, literally, people have been trying to build together a cohesive narrative of reality, and it's so hard. And again, that's, we can even see it with what the simulation theory is, just this idea of we need something, even if it's just a theory or a guess, to give us some sort of understanding about how we got here. We can't just not have a theory about it, because it's too large of a question not to answer, to not be sitting there. And again, even the idea of saying, we came from nothing or whatever, you're still answering the question. You can't just negate it. You can't just get rid of, where did I come from? Where am I going? All those things, they're built into you. And you have to answer the questions, even if people's questions don't look the same, or people's answers rather don't look the same. So, I don't know. I feel like I hammered really hard on the simulation theory, but what I'll say is that you can see the how do you say that? You can see the attempts at something akin to what these Christian or Hindu ideas really kind of portray. And I feel like I didn't do my a really good explanation, but maybe I'll try that again. But so even the terminology, right? A simulation. So what do we do when we're running tests? It's, to some degree, especially now in the world that we live in, is just everything is done through we're running simulations. And again, what is a simulation here for? Is to teach you. So there's even this subconscious level of like, well, what's the word that we're gonna use? Because we didn't just say, the fake reality we live in, or whatever it is, or the techno world, or I don't know. The word that we used was simulation, because again, we have this subconscious connection of, we're here to learn. The purpose of reality is to teach us things, to point us in the right direction, to grow us on whatever path it is that we're walking on. And again, running simulations or running a test, but for me, it's so cold and calculating, and I don't necessarily believe nature to be that way. I believe nature to be very loving and very intentional. Does that mean it can't be a giant computer? Sure, but again, I just think that we're projecting our reality onto something that is far bigger than just a computer. So I don't know. I wanted to leave you feeling like there are narratives of reality that do help you and do fill you with hope. And people can say that those are placebos or whatever it is. But I think for people to be intentional about finding ways that really help them move forward in a positive and beneficial way is, even some of the greatest philosophical atheists of our I won't say our lifetime, but of the collective history, they understood that philosophy and religion exist because people needed to be able to make sense of their reality. The details of the religion are debatable, but the fact that even atheism is its own religion, right? Because you're making a confirmation about the nature of reality and your relationship to it. And practices to a certain degree, but we need to be able to answer these things. And to me personally, it just seems much more beneficial, much more practical, and much more helpful to us as a species when it's done from a place of love and from a place of yes and a place of trying to be better and trying to, thrive and to shine light. And because for me, I really do believe, there's this verse in the Bible where Jesus is talking to Israel and he says, you're the light of the world and you're the salt of the earth. And he's not just talking to the country or the people, but he's talking to anyone who would attempt to walk the spiritual path. He's saying to us, you're the light of the world and you're the salt of the earth. And that's a heavy burden to bear, but I genuinely believe that it's the reason that we're here, for whatever it is. Again, I can't tell you exactly why we're here or whatever it is that we're doing, but it seems to me that the idea of loving your neighbor is of utmost importance. And I can only tell you that through living in a world where that isn't applied very well and seeing the fruits thereof. So let's fantasize together. What could this world look like if we just loved everybody? Now, I know love is a hard word to define, and how do you embody love, and what does love look like? I would say it starts with compassion, and you have to be able to see yourself in the other, because without that, you won't be able to extend true compassion. And you also need to be able to extend the compassion that you want to extend to others to yourself. You need to be able to allow yourself to be forgiven, even when you feel like you don't need or deserve that. You need to be able to tell yourself that you are not only someone who should be loved, but that you do deserve loved and you are loved greatly. So I don't know, friends. I hope that I've encouraged you. I hope I've been able to kind of point you to what is nature up to. It's your friend. And it wants the best for you. And it seems painful most of the times. But one of my favorite catchphrases is, you don't get a resurrected Christ without a crucified Christ. And hey, I just remembered another thing is, in Hinduism they have the idea of Kali, or Kali, who is a god that represents time. And she is a mother that gives birth to you and then eats you. And what is time if not that? Is that something has given birth to you? You're here, and the same reality that has brought you forth will again wipe you out into oblivion. And to say that that's not real is to say that the whole human experience isn't real to some degree. Because that's what it means to be human, is to step into time and space and time and to fuck around and figure out what we're doing here, you know? To fumble around and get from point A to point B and make a lot of mistakes. Because through a lot of mistakes, a lot of stuff will be learned and a lot of healing will be brought and a lot of transcendent value will emerge. But now I just kind of feel like I'm just talking a bunch and blah, 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 blah. But yeah, guys, nature is on your side. It loves you. Again, it's a mother. It's your friend. Reality is your friend. As much as it doesn't seem like it can be. But reality is, it's just holding whatever is here. And it's, to some degree, our perspective on it that really affects us. So I hope that you find peace with your reality. I think it's of utmost importance that you do. Yeah. I love you guys so much. I feel like I don't ever really say that. I appreciate everyone who listens and writes and lets me know what they're thinking about these things. It makes me very happy that in a time like this, when it would be so very easy to be bitter and jaded about the state of reality, that you instead listen to some random schmuck talk on the internet for 30 minutes about his thoughts about reality. And I hope that they've been nothing but beneficial to you. Yeah. Thanks for coming by, guys. Got a fun guest next week. I won't tell you who it is, but yeah. Just come back. Check out the Patreon. Make sure you give us a like on YouTube and on Facebook and all that stuff. But have a good time, friends. Enjoy the ride.